This is the Galaxy S23 Ultra. Over the last few months, I've realized something. If you don't have a preference and want a phone that does it all at a low price, there is no better phone to get than the S23 Ultra. A phone that was perfect at its launch but got significantly better as time went on while getting cheaper. I got this phone brand new for $850 at the start of 2024. Way cheaper than how much it initially went for. Guess how much you can get it for now? $700 brand new. Or if you want to go through the used or refurbished route, it gets even cheaper. And keep in mind, this was Samsung's best phone in 2023. It is still way better than the base S24 or S24 Plus in some aspects, and it is gonna be better than the upcoming S25 and S25 Plus in some aspects. In my years of owning a lot of Samsung flagships, this is the first one that has aged well as time went on, and you're gonna notice everything good about it the moment you pick the phone up. Now, I hate big phones and boxy corners, but for some reason this phone feels comfortable in my hands. I don't really have issues using it with a single hand. Add to that, it doesn't have flat sides like a lot of phones, and it has a slightly curved back which really helps with the in-hand feel. This is a phone that I enjoy using caseless even though it's big. In my opinion, I do feel the design of this phone is way better than the S24 Ultra. It's way more comfortable than that phone and looks way more premium. The S24 Ultra looks like a box. The design of the S25 Ultra leaked recently and it doesn't look that great. It ditches the boxy corners that the recent Ultras had for a rounded one, which helps with the in-hand feel, but it doesn't really go well for a phone that resembles the Galaxy Note in terms of design. Speaking of which, let's talk about the S Pen. I'm surprised that I'm saying it. I love it. This is the first phone I've owned that had a built-in stylus, and I've actually used it a lot with this phone than I expected. The boxy design of this phone goes well with using the S Pen, and I'm kinda disappointed that they're ditching it with the S25 Ultra. The Ultras are the oldie phones that come with an S Pen now, and if you want one, there is no better phone to get. They nailed the basics with this phone. Great haptics, great speakers, IP68 rating, wireless charging, and reverse wireless charging. This is still one of my favorite features. Now, the only con I have with the design of this phone is the thick bottom bezel on the display. It's not that big, but why? The base S23 and S23 Plus had symmetrical bezels. Apple has been doing them since the iPhone X in 2017. What was Samsung's excuse in 2023? I'm glad that Samsung fixed it with the S24 Ultra. Yeah, I'm a snob for symmetrical bezels, but let's talk about the display. It's 2024 and this phone still has a very good display. Samsung's phones have always had the best displays and this is no exception. It's color accurate, vibrant, it has high refresh rate, and it gets plenty bright outdoors. Also, the S23 Ultra is the last Samsung phone with a curved display. I'm not a fan of curved displays, especially with big phones, but a lot of people seem to like it and miss it on the S24 Ultra. And if you want one, this is the phone to get. The only phone that beats the S23 Ultra is the S24 Ultra, which has an anti-reflective coating that really helps with using that phone in harsh conditions. Honestly, that's one of the biggest upgrades I've seen to smartphone displays in a while. Now, other brands claim that they have brighter displays, but it's just a single pixel that can get that bright. This is the biggest improvement that Samsung failed to advertise, and at the same time nobody has copied it yet. But even with Samsung phones having the best display, their phones are consistently the worst phones to watch HDR content on. Now, when you watch HDR content, you need the brights to be really bright regardless of your ambient conditions. That is the whole appeal of HDR. But Samsung phones shift the brightness according to your ambient conditions for HDR content. That just ruins the whole HDR experience, and the end result looks considerably dull and washed out in comparison to my iPhone 13 Pro, which has a lower max brightness for HDR content compared to the S23 Ultra. The viewing experience is way better on the 13 Pro since it isn't decreasing the brightness for the bright parts or crushing the contrast in the process of adjusting to my ambient conditions like the Samsung. I could have kinda excused this behavior, but the brightness changes aren't smooth at all, which is even more distracting and annoying. And you can't even turn this off. It's not an issue on Android, but Samsung software. I hope they fix this someday. Viewing regular old content is still very good and immersive on this phone, and yes, this was shot on the S23 Ultra, so let's talk about the cameras. The S23 Ultra has a really good set of cameras. It's very similar to the S24 Ultra, where that phone swaps out the 10 megapixel 10x periscope lens for a 50 megapixel 5x lens. Now, the general opinion I've seen about Samsung's cameras is that they are bad compared to other ultra level flagships in the hardware front. We have Chinese companies like Oppo, Vivo, and Xiaomi who are bringing insane camera hardware to their phones, and hardware isn't really the full story. Software has been playing a huge role lately, and Samsung has been doing a good job with their software. My overall opinion on all of this is that yes, Samsung is lacking in the hardware front, and you can only go so far with software. But that doesn't mean their phones have terrible cameras. The S23 Ultra has a well-rounded set of cameras, and the photos are really good. They are rich in contrast, very sharp, dynamic range is really good, but I do feel they go a bit overboard sometimes. All the 4 cameras are pretty consistent at daylight. Night mode is pretty good with this phone, but there's a noticeable amount of shutter lag with the main sensor, which is annoying. Except for the main camera, camera, the other three cameras fall apart at low light with inconsistent colors and a lot of noise. And the telephoto lenses are the most inconsistent at low light. Sometimes I get good shots, whereas sometimes I don't. I'm glad that Samsung has an intermediary optical zoom range, but the 3x lens isn't really good at low light compared to the iPhone 15 Pro's 3x lens. But it performs well in many other scenarios. Portrait mode is really good on the S23 Ultra. And in terms of photos, it really comes down to personal preference. Video is good on the S23 Ultra. It performs well on good lighting, on par with the iPhone 15 Pro. But the moment the light dips, it's a noisy mess. I wouldn't call this an advantage, but the phone can shoot in 8K at up to 30 FPS and it doesn't make a huge difference, to be honest. The front camera is excellent, really good skin tones and good dynamic range. I honestly love the front camera. Front video is good. It's not the best I've seen, but you know what else would be great? A subtitles channel. Some kid was screaming in the background, so yeah, do it. Here's my main takeaway with the S23 Ultra's camera setup. It is very good and versatile. You're not gonna find a better camera setup on other Samsung phones at this price. The performance is great on this phone. The 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy is still very capable. Sure, it would be great to have the latest and greatest, but phones with these newer chips are really expensive. And you're not gonna notice the extra performance for 90% of the tasks. You can throw anything at this phone and it will handle it without any issues. Benchmark scores mean nothing, and this phone's a perfect example of that. According to Geekbench 6, a 2021 iPhone still destroys it. But in the real world, both the iPhone 13 Pro and S23 Ultra perform identically. And it doesn't really get that hot, something you can't say for older iPhones. Wow. Performance isn't the only thing though. Samsung's biggest strength compared to other Android phones is their software. One UI is arguably the best Android skin out there. It strikes a perfect balance with simplicity and features. With One UI 6.1, the S23 lineup got every single Galaxy AI feature that the S24 lineup had, and that's my main reasoning behind making this video. The S25 lineup will also get more AI features that will eventually come to the S23 lineup, and that will make the S23 Ultra even more interesting, as it will still be better than the base S25 and S25 Plus in some aspects, while having all the features that Samsung will heavily advertise for those phones. It is no secret at this point that companies only want to talk about AI at this point. Now obviously those newer phones would be better at certain AI tasks compared to the S23 Ultra, since those phones were designed with these features in mind, but the differences are currently negligible. And if you're gonna buy a phone based on its AI features, Samsung has the best ones out there. Huge props to Samsung for giving their AI features to their older phones. I'm not gonna talk about every single Galaxy AI feature here, since I've already made a video comparing both Apple Intelligence and Galaxy AI. But I've seen this argument go around lately that One UI has the worst animations on a phone. To be fair, it's not as bad as a lot of people are making out to be. It is worse than the iPhone in terms of overall fluidity, but it's not that far off. I've seen companies showcase how their Android skins are way more fluid compared to One UI. That is just too much exaggeration at this point. But Samsung has seemingly listened to all of this and fixed all of its animations with One UI 7. It looks a lot cleaner and refined. Speaking of One UI 7, one of the cons with getting an older Android phone is long-term software support. And in that aspect, you don't really need to worry with Samsung. The S23 Ultra was promised to get 4 years of major updates and 5 years of security updates. Considering One UI 7 is right around the corner and that will be this phone's second major update, you still have 2 years of major updates and 3 years of security updates. That's still very great considering how much you're getting with this phone. Samsung has stuck to long-term software support in the past, so I can trust them in this regard. And unlike Samsung's past software iterations, their phones really don't slow down with updates lately. I've had the S20 since 2020 and that phone really didn't slow down with its last major update, apart from it constantly running hot due to the Exynos 990. Their newer phones are getting 7 years of software support, which is really good and kinda gives me hope that maybe Samsung might squeeze another year of major updates for this phone. I'm just guessing at this point, they probably would. But what about the battery life? This phone gets me through a whole day with no issues. You can easily squeeze another day too with its battery. The Ultras have always had huge batteries and this is no exception. I constantly get 8 to 9 hours of screen on time with this phone. It has a very good battery that you don't need to worry about. This phone does fully charge up in an hour with a 25-watt charger, which isn't really fast compared to OnePlus or Xiaomi phones, which take less than half the time this phone takes to charge up. But it's really not that bad considering you don't need to top up this phone often due to its good battery. It's kinda sad that Samsung hasn't really increased their charging speed or battery capacity since 2020. They've been really scared since the Note 7. I mean, bomb. Network performance with this phone is rock solid. I constantly got fast speeds everywhere. So why am I heavily recommending this phone over the S24 or even the upcoming S25? Well, the simple reason is that you aren't getting much apart from a better processor on those newer phones. The S23 Ultra still has a very good display, the S Pen, better camera system, better battery, and the same software features as those phones. The only phones that would remotely beat beat the S23 Ultra is the S24 Ultra or the upcoming S25 Ultra. But both those phones would still be way more expensive than this phone currently. And since it's been almost 2 years now since its release, there are really good deals for this phone that make it a better option over the base S series flagships. None of those Ultra exclusive features are ever gonna show up for a while to the base models. And if you want them, there is no better phone to get than the S23 Ultra. It is honestly the most refined and perfect Samsung phone in so many years. A lot of people still love this phone to this day. Samsung isn't really pushing the boundaries lately. Their phones have been very stale and it makes no sense to buy the latest and greatest from them. I've been trying to find one negative with this phone, but there isn't any that's gonna hamper your everyday experience. This is still a great buy if you're on a budget and want the best of the best. I've said this before and I'm gonna say it again. Buying an older flagship makes a lot of sense instead of buying a newer mid-range or higher end phone. Watch this video to see how I suffered with a BlackBerry.